Schools are a second home to many and a safe community for our children to learn, explore new opportunities, and develop skills so they are better able to make choices and adapt to the world at large. The education system bears the responsibility of the socio-economic well-being of our nation, and to do this, it takes the largest percentage of our national budget. The big question is if the ministry is delivering the goods, or if it's simply widening the seed of conflict.
Whether we like it or not, education is inherently sensitive. It touches the hearts of the Malaysian populace and consciousness. It's easily racialized, it's easily linked to issues of religiosity. When we talk about this issue, and we have to be fair and honest, right? Where did the problem occur? What happened to our national schools? Why are there a lot of Chinese and Indians who will opt out from our national education curriculum and go for vernacular schools or private schools? Even middle-class Malay parents today are taking out their children from our national education curriculum and spending a lot more to go to private schools.
To find out what went wrong, let's start by looking at how the school system in Malaysia was established. The earliest form of schooling in Malaysia dated back more than 200 years and was set up by the communities in Malaya. They included the Sekolah Pondok for the Muslim community, the Chinese schools with the main objective of providing education in Chinese, and Tamil schools set up for migrant workers by plantation estates of rubber, tea, coffee, and sugar. Many of the earliest English schools were set up in commercial regions of the Straits Settlement of Penang, Malacca, and Singapore, and tin mining towns of Taiping and Klang. Attending English schools were deemed prestigious, as learning the bread-earning language of Malaya gave access to better employment. During the colonial period, missionary schools were set up by the Lasallian Brothers and the Sisters of the Holy Infant Jesus. They raised and educated students for a small fee, attracting students from all walks of life, of all races and social standings, from commoners to royalties. By the 70s, there were over 400 mission schools. Due to global standards adopted by these schools, they produced globally competitive students. As there were no provisions for secondary Malay vernacular schools, Richard Winstead proposed a central training college following his trip to Philippines and Java to study vernacular and industrial education. This resulted in the Sultan Idris Training College, built on an 80-acre site. Graduates included educationist Aminuddin Baki and writer Pandita Zaaba. Today, this is known as University Pendidikan Sultan Idris. In preparation for independence and the exit of British colonialists, Malaya's future leaders were making plans for a new system of national education. The Barnes Report of 1951 recommended a national school system which would provide primary education for 6 years in English and Malay, with the hope that over time the Chinese and Tamil schools would slowly disappear. This was met with disapproval by the non-Malay communities who, whilst they had agreed to Malay as the official language, had felt that Chinese and Tamil language are important components of Malaya's new national identity. In the same year, the federal government commissioned the Fenwu Report to look at how Chinese schools can better contribute to and have a common loyalty to an independent Malaya. The resulting report promoted trilingualism for Chinese Malayans with Malay as the official language, English as the business language, and Chinese as the cultural language, and supported the idea of a national community that preserved the existing multiculturalism. The Razak Report was a compromise, forwarding the Malay language as the main language of instruction, but allowed for a retention of other language medium schools. It provided for Malay, English, Chinese, and Tamil schools at the primary school level, and Malay and English schools at the secondary school level. Malay medium schools are referred to as national schools or Sekolah Kebangsaan, while other schools are referred to as national type schools or Sekolah Jenis Kebangsaan, also known as vernacular schools. All schools are government funded and use a common national curriculum regardless of school type. The Razak Report was incorporated as Section 3 of the Education Ordinance, 1957.
A lot of people are looking at education, whether there's a polarization at the moment, which is clear. But if we were to blame the whole thing on the vernacular school or the mother language school, it's not true also, because the mother language to me in Malaysia now, at the primary school level, even in United Nations, all the research study internationally, it is actually the most effective language to learn. Now, but we must not forget that majority of these Chinese students, after their Chinese primary school, 85% of them, once they go to secondary, they actually go into the government stream.
Whilst Chinese primary schools were allowed to use Chinese as the main medium of instruction, the secondary schools were required to change their medium of instruction to English. Many vernacular schools converted to national schools, with a small group opting out to become private high schools, or Chinese independent high schools. Today, this constitutes a small group of 60 schools. The National Language Act 1967 was aimed at creating a greater sense of national identity and consolidated the use of Bahasa Malaysia as the official language of the country. Coupled with the race riot of 1969, many of the mission schools opted to be nationalised by 1971. This started the process of phasing out English, and by 1983, most of the mission schools became Malay medium schools. A known fact, but not properly researched, is the subsequent inequality in national schools, with students, parents, teachers complaining of race-based preferential policies, unequal distribution of educational funding, dumbing down of syllabus, leaked papers, decline in the use of English, and unbalanced historical narratives.
When we talk about this issue, and we have to be fair and honest, right? Where did the problem occur? What happened to our national schools? And that's when you look in the 1980s, where we shifted away from English, where we moved into a centralization education system in which everything is imposed upon schools, right? It's no longer a decentralized approach. That's where you see a lot more religious and cultural imposition upon schools, the reduction of math, science, and English. So why do you blame parents who will then be forced to opt out to other schooling systems because of a failure to manage our national education curriculum well?
Parents concerned about the quality of education in national schools opted for private schools or national type schools. Data has it that by 2003, 90% of Malays, Chinese, and Indians were respectively in Malay, Chinese, and Indian schools, reinforcing racial segregation. In 2011, student enrollment in national schools were 94% Malays, 88% Chinese in Chinese schools, and 100% Indians in Tamil schools. By 2016, non-Chinese students make up 18% of Chinese language primary schools, reflecting an increasing trend of non-Chinese enrollment into national-type Chinese schools. Although this is a small percentage, it reflects a loss of confidence in national schools.
I think when it comes to issues of education, you really need great political will and bipartisanship, but leadership and courage to change it no matter how unpopular it may be in the short term. Especially when people keep on saying, oh, we need to look at racial and religious sensitivities. How can you talk about this? In the end, you will lose the support of the majority Malays. But my argument to this is that, one, if you allow it to continue, Malaysia is bound to fail. But two, yes, you may roll it back. It will be unpopular in the short term, but with the right management of education, when more Malays get quality education, better jobs, when they realize that learning, being bilingual or trilingual, get them better job offers and better pay, then they themselves will respect and will more likely vote for you. For even from a political perspective, it is important for us to break the typical political norm, which is to conform to status quo, than to acknowledge that there is a problem and to reform it.
The national schools actually are disempowering and disenfranchising the very people that you purport to help, right? Because it is almost entirely now Malay, Muslim, of people of the demographic that can't afford any other choice, right? And ironically, Chinese schools are now actually more multiracial than the national schools. And clearly, the only way to regain the confidence of people is to make national schools the schools of choice. Do we have the political will that Syed and everyone has talked about to make the change? Because it isn't rocket science.
Regardless of the language of instruction, this loss of confidence in the national school system has far-reaching consequences, and without action, it threatens to further increase the gap between the rich and the poor. So how can we improve the quality of national education? Watch the next episode of Breaking Down the Issues to find out.